Hello everybody and welcome to this Easy 11 Plus live lesson on cloze passages in English and reasoning exams. I had a few technical problems as I was getting this going, but I hope you're with me now and everything's working. Right, if you find this video useful, please remember to like and subscribe. Check out the links in the video description, including some free things, and don't forget that my live lessons are every Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock. Okay. Let's get started. So, cloze passages are where you have gaps in words to fill in. The next exercise, the second exercise in this, is going to be where the gaps actually offer multiple choice possibilities, but we'll come to that a little bit later on. Let's start with this. This is from Gulliver's Travels. Now, this isn't the hardest exercise you might come across, but I thought it might be useful just to get an idea of the basic technique for these, because as you'll see, there are two essential things that you need to bear in mind. One thing is that you need to think about the passage, the context of what's happening, to guide you towards which answers might be likely. And the other thing is you need to think about the words themselves and the gaps in them to think about which letters, which combinations of letters might belong naturally in those spaces. Oh, I forgot to mention, by the way, of course, as always, the worksheet for this lesson is linked in the video description. So you can always go in there, print out the worksheet and have a go at these yourselves. These exercises are taken from some papers in 11 Plus Lifeline. There are full answers there. This time you get the answers right now in this video. Okay, so this is from Gulliver's Travels, as I mentioned, and you might recognise the scene here as you read through it if you know that book at all. So I heard a kerfuffle noise about me. Some kind of noise. Okay, so I heard a something noise. It isn't clear what kind of noise, but let's think about this. So what clues do we have? Well, I'm actually particularly interested in this D at the end, because there aren't many things that would naturally go before a D. So you might have an N. In fact, let's do this in capitals so it's nice and clear, partly because of my handwriting. So you might have an N there. Something fuind. Nothing really goes naturally. It just looks wrong. But the other thing that really naturally goes before a D is an E. Okay. Okay. Furred. Footed. Now, come on. There's one thing that naturally goes here. Even if you ignore the first part of the word, it's going to be an S. Think of the word fused. Confused? Oh, of course, it's confused. So, that's a fairly simple one. I'm sure you spotted it ages ago. But I'm trying to illustrate the way that you can zoom in on certain letters, think about the combinations that belong naturally, until the word pops out of you. But in the something where I lay, it could see nothing except the sky. So could see, of course, it's using the I from up here, so it's I could see nothing except the sky. Okay, Now, you may get an idea here straight away, but let's think through it. This here has to be a vowel, and there aren't many vowels available. The only things it could really be are A, E, I, O, U, and I suppose possibly Y kind of belongs in that group. So let's go through it. The pass, okay, something begins in pass and ends in re, that describes a place, somewhere where you might lie. Pass, so if you just don't have any idea, you might think, well, S often has a double S. Pass, now we really need a vowel. Passar, passer, passir, passor, passur, it just doesn't work. The other thing that really commonly comes after an S is a T. Ah, pasture. Okay. Or is it posture? So you could argue for posture because being in a certain posture might stop you seeing anything except the sky, as the sentence says, so we're looking at the context. But in the posture where I lay, where refers to a place, right? And posture means your position, the way your body's laid out, isn't a place, is it? It's the posture in which I lay. So that's a little bit strange. If I put pasture, then it fits where much better. Doesn't really explain why you could see nothing except the sky, but it fits the grammar slightly more naturally, the word choice of where. So I think pasture is the right answer here. In fact, I know that it's the right answer here from the original book, but even not knowing that, it's a more likely option. I think posture would be a very good guess, but not quite there. Okay. In a little time, I felt alive moving on my left leg. Now, there are loads of gaps here, but it's alive. It's going to be something, isn't it? Now, if you weren't clear on that, there are some things that might help you. So we got a G at the end, so it's very likely to be an ing. And if you've got T something ing, then the H is also very likely. This is, oh, that's a horrible H. Between the M and the T is very likely to be a vowel, so you can try the vowels out. You get to something pretty much whichever angle you approach this word from. Something. In a little time I felt something alive moving on my left leg, which, vank, gently forward over my breast, came almost up to my chin. So this is a verb describing something that something did gently, because this is an adverb, so this must be a verb. Some action was performed gently, which gently. Now let's think about this. Let's say that the word was run. So which ran gently forward over my breast came almost up to my chin. Doesn't make sense. It would have to be which running gently forward over my breast came almost up to my chin. It needs to be a participle. So if you say the sentence trying out other words in the space, you can get an idea of the kind of word we need. So we can be pretty certain that this is an ing word. Something vancing. So if you haven't got it now, you may not, because perhaps you don't know the word. If you know the word at this point, you'll probably get it. Advancing. Advancing forward is actually a little bit tautological. In other words, it's repeating an idea. And if someone sent me this bit of writing to mark, I might say you don't need the word forward. You can just say advancing gently over my breast, and it means the same thing. But we can let Jonathan Swift get away with this because he's a much better writer than I am, or was. Gently forward over my breast came almost up to my chin. When bending my something downward, we don't have any context here for what this might be, as much as I could, I something it to be a human creature, not 6 inches high. So this is about working out what something is. Siddharth, please stop posting the same word thousands of times. It just takes up the space for everybody else, and I can't see their comments. Thank you very much. As Tony says, stop spamming. Thank you. Right, so this is about looking for something and working out what it is. So what would you bend downward in an attempt to do this? It would be your head, but something Y doesn't fit with that, or your eyes. And so eyes is the answer here. So sometimes, as you've seen there, it isn't even worth worrying about the gap word until you've read a fair bit more to work out what's happening, and then you can work it out pretty easily. Okay, I something Eve it to be a human creature. So we need a word meaning to work something out or to spot something. So if you know this word, you might get it straight away. If you don't know the word, well, we can try some things out. So what comes after P? The consonants that might come after P, so pl, ploy, not really, doesn't ring a bell, no. Other consonants, not many options here. Let's try some vowels. Any of the vowels might go here. So A, I passive, no, not really, partived. So we're just trying things out, trying to jog our memory. Not doing it mathematically, but putting different things in that fit to try and create a memory jog. Okay, P, okay, if you've got P, it's often per is a really common opening. Permit and so on. Perceived. And again, you get to a certain point with these where you've got enough letters in there and enough context that either you're going to spot it. Tony says, Robert, I said perceived. You did. Well done. As did many other people, but congratulations. So you get to a certain point where you've got enough in there that either it's going to come popping out or you need to cut your losses, not waste more time, and move on. And then when you come back later and you've given your brain a chance to think about some other things, it might come back into your mind. So good exam technique is often, it can also be about knowing when to quit so that you can come back later and at least not waste loads of time fighting for that 1 mark and losing lots of other marks later on because you spent too much time on it. With a bow and arrow in his hands and quo at his back. Now there are very few clues here, and words beginning with Q, it's a bit tricky. But when you've got a Q, there's a really good clue for you straight away, because almost all words beginning with Q are followed by a U. Okay? And after the U, you're almost always going to have a vowel. Something like a, quar, like quarter, but we haven't got the letters for that. It doesn't really make sense, only a quarter of what at his back. E, a qua, queeter? No. I, queer, quiz. Quit. Quiver. Now what could that be? And even if you don't know what this means, you have found something that fits, you couldn't find anything better, and you might move on. Now if you know a little bit about archery, you'll know that a quiver is the kind of tube over your shoulder that you store the arrows in, so that you can grab an arrow and go boom. Well, I suppose it'd be with this jump, and like that, and launch your arrow. I did actually used to do some archery when I was a child, but I've obviously forgotten it if I can't remember which hand is which. Anyway, and a quiver at his back. Another thing you might have done here if you were a bit stuck, let's say that you got the QU and then were a bit confused. In a short word like this, before the R is very likely to be an E, and that would also give you a lead in. So you might have got that far and then come up with the V to fill the gap. In the menthol mint, I felt at least 40 more of the same kind as I following the first. Okay, in the something, he felt at least 40 more of them. In the, so it's either a place, so it's like some body part, or it's some other phrase. Well, M-E blank N. And it might jump out at you that there's a word in here, a common word, mean. Or mean as an average. In the oh come on, you know what it is by now. In the meantime, as many people are writing in the comments. In the meantime, I felt at least 40 more of the same kind as I, following the first. And now we got a really difficult word. Let's see whether anyone manages to get it in the comments. Let's scroll down a bit so we can see a bit more of this. In the same kind as I something following the first. So don't panic when you see something like this. Just work out what you might be able to do. So it's a little bit tricky to do much with this gap if you don't know what the word is, but this gap here is crying out to be filled. Because this must be a vowel. We can't say as I kdn or as I kln. Not going to happen. We need a vowel. So as I as I cantered. Nothing really springing out there. As I sin or kin, sin, I'm going in the funny order here. Centered, that kind of sounds a bit better, but nothing jumps out again. AEI, con, that's a really common word opening. As I contoured, con sort of feels best, but this is exactly the kind of situation where you might go, right, I do not know this word, and so rather than wasting a lot of time, I'm going to move on and see if something comes up when I come back. And I might even say, I kind of liked E, it sounded okay, so I might maybe write a note to myself, perhaps in pencil so I can get rid of it, something like that. No one's going to mistake that for the answer. It's just a note for me to consider in case my O was wrong. And by the way, if you're doing one of these and you actually have to write your answers in the answer space, I really, really, really recommend that you use a pencil, because if you fill in loads of the gaps and they're wrong, you're stuck. And if you want to try things out in the way I'm doing, you want to be able to rub out your work that you've done. As icon, right. But we're going to stick with this one anyway. We're not going to come back to it. As icon, could be loads of things after the C. Cons, and so on and so on and so on. Ooh. And then this here, it could be something like natured. What I'm getting at here is that you're going to struggle to work this one out. And sometimes this just happens. Sometimes you just have to know something. By this point, you may have worked it out. And if you have, you'll know what I'm about to say. Let's look at the context for a second. I felt at least 40 more of the same kind, something, following the first. So you may be able to work out that this is something to do with him working something out or guessing it. 40 more of the same kind, as I thought, as I imagined, as I counted, following the first. It's conjectured. As I guessed, as I speculated. Lots of people have guessed this. The first one I can see is from Siddharth, but there might have been somebody before. Anyway, well done to everybody who got that. I probably spent a little bit too long on that one. I was in the astonishment at something's. Okay, so if it's an S something ending, almost certainly to be an E. Rose. Buah. Odd, or a T. Words ending T. I was in the Well, this is likely to be a vowel. Est, ist, ost is often ost, utmost. Notice that when I have to find somewhere to try out letters, I'm really attracted to places where there's likely to be a vowel. And the reason for that is that when I'm looking at vowels, I've only got maximum of 6 options if I include Y to try out. Whereas if I'm trying a space where a consonant could go, then I've got a whole swath of the alphabet to play around with. So if I can spot a place where I'm pretty certain there's going to be a vowel, I've got a limited number of things to try out in my mind. As we found here with the O or O, when you try out a letter, look out for letters that might be pronounced in more than one different way depending on the situation, and try out the different pronunciations in your mind. Shashikala, please do not spam. Thank you. I was in the utmost astonishment and roared so loud that they all ran back. In fact, I'll keep there so we can see what's going. That they all ran back in a furt. Okay, so it could, of course, be something like they all ran back in a forest, but then you'd run into a forest. So that bit of context here is very important for ruling out something that might look appealing but doesn't actually fit. Now let's think about this. The person is lying on the ground and he's amazed, terrified, and he roars out loud, and they run back. Why would they run back? Because they are scared of him. So does that help us? All ran back out of fear, in a fright. as loads of people are writing in the comments. So don't get too hooked on something being a particular kind of word if there isn't definitive evidence. So in this case, you might have become very caught up with the idea that this was a thing. If not a forest that they run into, it's something that they run back inside. But you need to be aware that there are idiomatic phrases such as in a fright that could also fit in this situation. And some of them, as I was told, were hurt with the falls they got by leaping from my sides upon the ground. Now for this we have very, very little to help us. What we can see that there's probably a consonant here. We can see that there is probably a vowel here. But in a word that's so long, yes, you might try out some vowels and eventually get a slightly better clue, but it could be pretty much any vowel, to be honest, if we don't know what else is in this word. So you really have to rely on the context here. Try for words that fit with what's going on, that begin with A, and then check that they fit the letter gaps. So what's going on? Some of them, as I was something told. So is anybody telling him things at this moment? It appears not. The whole point is that he does not know what's happening and he's very confused. So if he was told, it must have been later on, afterwards. Some of them, as I was afterwards told, were hurt with the falls they got by leaping from my sides upon the ground. So these tiny creatures, leaping off him in fright, unfortunately managed to injure themselves. Afterwards, when I'm doing my short videos, and I'm doing these writing moments, as you'll have seen, I just put fast forward on, so you go brrrr and the letters appear, but unfortunately here you have to stop and watch me write. Were hurt with the falls they got by leaping from my side upon the ground. Not for commercial use. I don't think that's part of the passage. Okay. What could this be? Something they soon returned. So what clues do we have here? Well, for one thing, them returning is very different from them running away. So it might be some sort of contrast word. What else? Well, ever, so it could be something even, but I can't think of anything that would work there with that ending. Perhaps you can. Ever is another very common word ending and a word in its own right, of course, as well. Something ever they soon returned. It must be however. Another clue here is that it has a comma after it, and you should know, if your English is good, that however starting a sentence is always followed by a comma. So that comma might also be a hint. Priyanka is writing in the comments, help me! Priyanka, how can I help you? What is wrong? Okay. People are already putting comments down for the next one. And one of them who so far as to get a full sight of my face. So this is something about coming towards him or travelling. Okay, so we are going to need definitely a vowel here. Who, oh, this looks good. Vast, vantaged? No. You can't vantage something. You can have a vantage, a point of view, a place to look out from, but that doesn't quite work. It isn't quite right. But the N is kind of appealing. It does go naturally before the T, so let's keep that and see where anything goes with it. A-E, vented, it doesn't. It's not really going to take doesn't want to take a consonant there. Ventar, ventated, venter, ventai, vento, ventu, ventured. And even if you aren't absolutely certain about the word, you can think of adventured and adventure, and you can see how those letters are fitting together, and you might work it out even if you aren't absolutely confident in the word ventured, because the V really limits our options here. You could also get some ideas here by working backwards. So this is about things happening in the past, like returned. And so this is almost certainly going to be an ED word. And perhaps that's why I should have started. That would have given you a good lead-in. So he ventured so far as to get a full sight of my face, lifting something his hands and eyes by way of admiration. This is fairly straightforward. This must be up. Lifting up his hands and eyes by way of admiration. By way of admiration is a very old-fashioned way of putting it, but I'm sure we can all understand what's going on. So many spammers here. Mr. Tony Cotton, you've spent time in this lesson telling other people not to spam, and now you're doing it like an inveterate spammer. Stop spamming people. What are you doing? Cried out in something must be a vowel. Sari, Eri, Eerie, Siri. Don't think Siri's turning up here. Sorry. Su. Out in a. Su-do-do-do-do. Maybe not. Maybe it isn't a vowel. So, what other options might there be? Cried out in a scream wouldn't be with an I. Script. Cried out in a script. I don't know, is this an angry computer? Again, doesn't quite work. What else might happen? Cried out in a string. Interesting. In a strike. T is quite appealing, but just nothing quite works. What else naturally comes after S? Yeah. Hang on a sec. And this is where you think, have I gone in too precipitously? Always take the time to read the full context. Cried out in a something, this is not a noun. In a something but distinct voice. This is an adjective to describe the voice. And suddenly it becomes clear. This must be shrill to describe the voice. So, what I've just done there really illustrates what I was saying earlier on. You might immediately think, I've got lots of ideas for letters I can play with in this word. But if you do that before you've read the relevant following parts of the sentence, you might miss something really obvious and waste loads of time, as I've just done. Someone's just put skreek with a S-K-R-I-E-K as a suggestion. If that were a word, it would be a fantastic word. But unfortunately, it isn't. Hekina de gul. Hekina de gul. Or it's a little person, so Hekina de gul. The others, pair. The same word several times. But I then knew not what they meant. So although they did something, he did not know what these words meant. What might someone do with some words and you think, no, still don't know? They might shout them at you. They might say them again and again. Repeated. If you get a word like this, where you're given loads of blank and just a little clue somewhere, then it's quite likely that the word is pretty obvious from the context. Because otherwise the examiner would be giving you more clues, so it wasn't just a wild guess. And so if you see a word like this, with just a letter or two in the middle and nothing else and loads of space, read the rest of the sentence very carefully, especially carefully, and think about it, because that's probably where the key information is, rather than endlessly playing around with letter combinations. I lay all this while, as the reader may what? In great uneasiness. So what might you do? You can't rescue him. What's your reaction to something that you read about these peculiar events and the narrator's reaction? You might think, this is all a load of nonsense, this obviously didn't happen. Or you might believe it. And that's what this is. Now, you can get into it by letter clues as well. So the something at the end, almost certainly E, and then it's going to be probably either I've, beehive, or E, Coming after the B, quite a lot of things, vowels and consonants could go B, R, but the vowels are quite likely, you could play with them. But I think the context here leads us to believe pretty directly, in great uneasiness. At something, struggling to get you loose, I had the to break the strings and wrench out the pegs. That, and we'll go on to that next bit later. At last? Well, that really fits the meaning, but it doesn't fit the letters. Is there any other way of saying at last that might get us where we want to be? So at last. This is one of those ones that I just referred to. They're giving you one tiny clue and lots of context to help you. If you just can't see it, then you're going to need to move on and see whether your brain's a little bit livelier on it when you come back to it later. Often it's good to forget a problem by doing others and give yourself a fresh start on it. You might see something new. This one is going to be at length. At length, which means at last, after a long time. Slightly archaic, slightly old-fashioned, but it is still used in modern English. It isn't a completely outdated word. At length, struggling to get used, I had the something to break the strings and wrench out the pegs. Okay. Well, this must be a vowel. Something ain, na, een. Sounds like a cleaning product. Fresheen or something. Ein could be. Own, oon, Looney Tune. Fortune. So just playing around with the ideas. That obviously I've probably got there a bit faster because I know what the answer is. But I think you can manage that as well. You had the fortune to do something. Wrench out the plagues. That something, my left arm to the ground. Right, now let's think about what we were saying earlier. Think about what tense the passage is in, because this is definitely a verb. The pegs were somethinging the left arm to the ground. The pegs that, but it can't be an ing, it must be an ed, almost certainly. Okay, before the st is going to be a vowel. Pasted, almost. Well, let's think about it. We've got an ed, an st word, to describe being tied down to the ground. And at this point, if you can't get it, it's another one where you might park the thought, move on, come back. It's going to be restrained. Oh, but is it? Well, that's me making a mistake because I just looked at it and thought restrained. So there we are. Right, so it can't be that. So what else might it be? Got our ed still. Any other options for tying something down? So if I got this stuck in a test, I might just go, on I go. But it's fastened, because that's the option that fits, that describes something being tied down or secured to something. Marchiesium was writing the joy in their comment. I'm glad you're taking so much joy from this. For while lifting it up to my face, I discovered the somethings they had taken to bind me. Something odds. And at the same time, with a something pull, which gave me something pain, I a little loosened the strings that tied on my hair on the left side. So this might be a thing they'd used to tie him down. But odds, somethings they'd taken to bind me. It's going to have to be methods. I'm moving slightly faster now. You aren't given many clues here. It would be really hard to work this out by putting in different letters and trying out combinations, because lots of things could go before odds. But you need to be flexible. Don't just think that it must be a thing. Consider other possibilities for nouns that could go here. And at the same time, with a something pull, which gave me pain, so some kind of pull that hurts you and wrenches everything away, violent pull, which gave me something pain. So you might really be sucked in by a word like excruciating or something like that. But we got an E on the end. Oops. Lots of X words have an E after, like I'm thinking of excitement has an I, so there are other options. But one that really comes to mind is excess, excessive, too much, pain. I little loosened the strings that tied down my hair on the left side so that I was just able to turn my head about 2 inches. There's a number here. You can tell that it's some kind of unit of measurement. It's from an old book, so inches makes sense. Okay, we took quite a while on that. Perhaps it was a little excessive, but I hope you got some useful thoughts about how you might go about doing these. There isn't one clear method that you always apply. You have to have a mix of techniques that you pull in, such as thinking, what part of speech is it? Is it a noun? Is it a verb? Is it an adjective? And so on. Thinking, what tense is this in? If we're dealing with a verb and it's in the past, it's very likely to end with ed. Thinking, can a consonant go there? Can I find any places in this word where there must be a vowel or where there's almost certainly a vowel? And then you've just got 6 options to try out, and so on. But perhaps above all else, think of the context in a broad sense. Make sure you've read a healthy amount around it and really visualised what's happening and the emotions and the characters before you plunge into the word. Because that way you'll actually have a good chance of spotting the answer before you've tried every possible combination of letters and gone through millions of non-existent words. Right, this is very different. This is multiple choice. So we need to select an answer like this with a bar through it. That doesn't really matter so much. The main thing is that we get the right answers. In an exam, it does matter. You must fill in the answers in exactly the way that you're told to. This is a little bit different because nobody's marking you, apart from yourself. Okay, right. So, ski something is a sport that most children will be interested in. It could be lots of things here. We need to read on a bit to get an idea. To make something begin at the top of a hill as one would in coasting with a sled and lean well forward with the skis. And okay, this is about heading down a hill on skis. So ski coasters, I mean, it's not necessarily wrong, but it would be a bit odd. Ski soaking and ski waxing, I mean, these have nothing to do with what's happening. So we can get rid of these. And then coasting or coast is called ski coasters or ski coasting. Well, it's an activity. The coasting is much more likely. So that's going to be our answer. In fact, the word is also used here. To make snowmen, not relevant. To make your way, could be, to go on your way. An ascent, a descent. Are we going up an ascent? Are we going down a descent? So sometimes you need to know a bit of vocabulary so as not to get completely lost. Begin at the top of a hill. Okay, so if you begin at the top, you can't ascend unless you're flying, so that can't be right. So to make a descent or to make your way, well, either could be the answer, but this is clearly about coming down a hill on skis. So a descent fits the context much more precisely. If, as I'm sure you have, you've watched my videos on multiple choice comprehension, check them out in the channel if you haven't already, you'll know that I often say sometimes there is more than one possible right answer. You have to choose the best answer, and in a situation like this, it's going to be the one that matches the passage most precisely. As one would in coasting with a sled and lean well forward with the skis ajar. Ajar? Slightly open? I guess I can almost imagine that, but no, it would just be a really, really, really weird way to say it. So, no, not really ajar. The skis perpendicular, adjacent, parallel. Now, you might just consider that parallel is clearly the most likely position for you to have your skis in if you're trying to make good speed down a hill. But perhaps you don't know that, perhaps you've got no concept of how skiing works really. Let's think through it. Ajar is a bit weird. It's describing, for example, a door being partly open. Hard to imagine here. Perpendicular or adjacent. So if you know what these words mean, if you know a little bit of maths, then then that will help you. So perpendicular will be like this. So one ski this way, one ski that way. If you've got any experience of sliding around on anything, ice skate, skis, anything, but if you try to do that kind of thing in contact with the ground, then you're probably going to go smack. And quite possibly down on your face if you do skis at that angle. That would not be a good idea. Unlikely to be good advice, unlikely to be the advice here. Adjacent can mean various different things. It can mean very near, but it would be slightly strange here to say adjacent in that way. It could be like at an angle like this, I guess, but just parallel makes way more sense. So we're left with adjacent or parallel as possibilities, and parallel seems far more natural. And with one foot tenderly ahead of the other. I love that, the idea of putting one foot tenderly ahead of the other. Slenderly ahead of the other. Slightly strange way to say slightly. You see, all these are kind of gearing towards slightly, which is the third option. One foot slyly ahead of the other, like you're trying to trick somebody. No, it's slightly, isn't it? Stop spamming the comments, please. XXLE, Tro Gaming, ZXX. What kind of Facebook username is that? Goodness me, I can't even pronounce it. Please stop spamming. The knees should be bent and the body frigid. Your body should be cold. No, of course not. Your body should be nice and cozy in your sensible skiing clothes. That would be a really strange bit of advice. The body frigidly. Which should be, the knees should be bent and the body frigidly. What's an adverb doing there? No. And the body digit. The knees should be bent and the body digit. Well, we're looking for an adjective like bent, right? Knees should be bent and the body something. And digit is a noun. So we're left with rigid. Even if you aren't exactly sure what it means, it's the only one really that makes any sense here. Body rigid means stiff. Okay? I'm not convinced exactly how good this advice is, but anyway, the weight should be borne by the knee of the foot that is behind. The knee of the foot? I'm not convinced by that. I don't think my foot has a knee. I think my leg does, but that's a different matter. By the coaster of the foot. A foot coaster. But then this is about ski coasting. I guess it's conceivable. Why did I just scribble that? It's like when you start doodling and do this kind of thing, and then you think, okay, I'll just fill that in like that. Oh, that bit looks nice to fill in. I'm sure you do these kinds of things when you're bored in a lesson sometimes. Of course, you mustn't, and I mustn't, because I'm the one teaching the lesson. Should be borne by the coaster of the foot that's behind. A bit weird, but we'll leave it for a sec. By the socket of the foot that is behind, by the ball. Which of these is most likely to be the part of a foot? So you need a little bit of general knowledge. The ball of a foot, that's a thing that you can talk about. The others, a little less so. As the start forward begins, the inference, extrapolation, suggestion, impulse will be to lean back. But this must be something. So yeah, as the start forward, as the movement begins, the inference and extrapolation, if you have any idea what these mean, they're clearly irrelevant. And I reckon you will. Because, no, actually, inference you'll definitely know. Because if you're studying comprehension skills for 11+, you'll have thought about implication and inference. Two sides of the same coin. The extrapolation, well, you might not know that, to be fair. The suggestion will be to lean back. Suggestion. From whom? A suggestion is normally made by somebody or something to you, and there's no implication that anyone here is suggesting, apart from the person writing this. And they can't say the suggestion will be this, because they're making the suggestion now, which is kind of absurd. So I think probably not. The extrapolation, the impulse will be to lean back. Now, if you have no idea what either of these words mean, then you're at a bit of bit of a dead end, let's say. But if you have an idea, it's impulse. But even here, we've reduced it to two options, which is much better. If you take a guess between those, you've got half a chance of being right. So always eliminate what you can, even if you end up having to guess. The impulse will be to lean back. In other words, I think they mean to say the instinct here. The instinctive urge is what they mean by impulse. Will be to lean back, but this must be, or you will take a tumble in the snow as you gain speed. So you mustn't do this. You mustn't lean back Okay, this is good advice. But this must be humbled. Your impulse, your own instincts must be humbled. It's a rather sort of a religious overtone to this, a bit strange. Must be overcome. Okay, that makes sense. You've got to overcome your impulse to lean back, or you'll fall. It must be triumphed. Triumph over something. It seems a little bit excessive. Your impulse must be smashed, or you will take a tumble. I like that idea. I mean, it does make sense grammatically, but it's also a very, very, very over-the-top way of saying it. All of these are just rather peculiar ways of saying overcome, which is by far the most natural fit. Someone says stop. Well, I will stop when I've done this. I'm trying to speed through a little bit. You can always stop the video. You have that power. You have the power to obliterate me from your screen and from your life just by pressing that cross button in the corner of your browser tab. In jumping with skis, an something drop is necessary. An unexpected drop. I don't think that's necessary. I think that would be rather alarming. An abrupt drop, a curt drop, an insolent drop is necessary. I don't think you want an insolent drop in your path, whatever it might mean. Abrupt or curt. Now, these are both here because you can be abrupt or curt to someone. You say, I've heard enough. I'll walk out of the room. You're being abrupt, you're being curt, you're also being really rude. But anyway, so these are words for being short and perhaps a bit rude with somebody. So that's why they're both here. But which of these could be used to describe a sudden drop as you're going along if you're skiing more like that? A curt drop or an abrupt drop? Maybe you don't know, in which case you're going to have to guess, but it's a two-way guess, which is better than a four-way guess, I've already said. Abrupt, though, is a much more natural fit, if you happen to know that. A sudden drop is necessary. For the beginner, a few inches is essential, superfluous, sufficient, ubiquitous. Now, for the beginner, a few inches is essential. It kind of sounds right, but for the beginner, a few inches. So what's it saying? That for someone who's more experienced, you could do it with less than a few inches. What if you had less than a few inches of drop? What's the point? It's not even going to feel like a drop. It's going to be a little bump as you go along. So to say the few inches is essential for the beginner, if you kind of extrapolate, if you build on that, it just doesn't really make sense. What are they trying to say? Is superfluous? You might not know what that means. Is ubiquitous? Maybe not. Is sufficient. For the beginner, a few inches of drop are enough. Sufficient makes so much sense here that you can confidently go for it even if you aren't certain what superfluous or ubiquitous mean. In fact, superfluous means unnecessary, too much. Ubiquitous means you can find it anywhere. Neither of these really works. The start is made by coasting down a precipitation, a precipice. A precipice? No, you're not going to coast down that. You're going to fall to your death. We definitely don't want to do that, and I'm sure they wouldn't be advising it. Coasting down an inclination, an incline, a precipitation. Now, if you don't know anything about these words, you're going to be totally stuck and you're going to have to guess three ways. But hopefully you know that to precipitate is to fall and that precipitation is rainfall. Brrr. So that is not relevant here. You definitely don't want to be plunging off any cliffs. You might also simply associate it with precipice and realise it's a related idea and therefore not relevant. An inclination and incline. Right, well, I'm here to tell you that actually either of these words is potentially right here. But an inclination is more often used to describe when you're inclined to do something. I have a strong inclination to eat fish and chips, for example. I actually do, come to mention it. Anyway, coasting down an incline is a slightly better fit, meaning a slope. And just before the takeoff is reached, the runner, I guess that's the person running on the skis, assumes a crouching attitude and then straight presupposes a crouching attitude, pretends to a crouching attitude. I don't think so. The runner waxing a crouching attitude and then what? Assumes, presupposes. So now you need to have some idea. Well, to assume an attitude, you can assume something. I assume that you are all geniuses, but it can also mean to take up, to assume a position. Imagine a pilot shouting, "Assume the brace position," before you all perish dramatically. That fits naturally. And presupposes is, whatever it means, a less obvious fit. Well, to presuppose is to assume in advance, in the sense of to presume. that something will be the case. Let's put it that way. So you need to take a crouching attitude and then straightens up quickly, maintaining an erect attitude, predisposition, presence until they're about to land. When, as in jumping, the knees are bent slightly. So if you've got an idea what erect means, you still should be able to work out that it's something to do with your posture, because when you land, the knees are bent slightly, but until then, it's something else. So erect is going to mean your knees not bent slightly. So it's either going to mean really crouched down or standing really straight up. An erect altitude means height, doesn't it? I'm sure you know that. So that, it doesn't make sense. Attitude. Okay, so attitude can be the position of something as well as its point of view. Predisposition, that's about well, if you don't know these words, you're going to be stuck, frankly. Presence doesn't really fit, but attitude, predisposition, difficult. It is, in fact, attitude. Predisposition means your state of mind or your emotions, your either your normal character and emotions, or how you feel about something before it happens. So, for example, I am predisposed to believe you. In other words, I'm likely to believe you even before I hear what you've got to say, for example. But an erect attitude, an erect posture, that's what it means, fits here until they're about to land, when you bend your knees slightly to something the force of landing. Okay, to snap the force, to crack the force, to exercise the force, I like that, but it's clearly to break the force of landing. During the flight, the skis might be kept perfectly parallel, but, well, it works. Could be kept perfectly parallel. Were to doesn't fit. So might, could, and should all fit. What is this that we're reading? It's a set of instructions, and you'll see through it that everything is very precise. It doesn't say you might do this or this or this, really. It's telling you what you should be doing. The skis should be kept perfectly parallel, but meandering slightly behind. So meander. Maybe you don't know that word. Come back to it. But drifting slightly behind. Okay. Drooping slightly behind. Interesting. Let's think about it. I'm trying to think what notes I put about how to explain this one. I think looking at this, actually, I think this is a little bit harder than I considered it when I first wrote this, because I can see more than one thing that kind of works. Flagging, not really. To flag, like to tire, to fall back because you're running out of energy. Doesn't really fit here. Yeah, I can't imagine it being used to give a technical instruction, except in climbing, actually, but we're not talking about climbing. Carefully parallel, but drifting, drooping. Well, meandering, drifting, drooping. Meandering, they're kind of waving around. You have to know it, really, unfortunately, or you won't get this right. Like a river has a meander where it bends around, or someone sort of walking along aimlessly. You wouldn't have instructions to let your skis kind of go where they want. That seems a bit odd here in a quite a difficult, dangerous situation. It seems a strange thing to advise. Drifting or drooping slightly behind. So drifting means that they're kind of running out of your control a bit, perhaps. Drooping slightly behind, so the back of the skis hang down a little bit. And how would that help? Well, when you land, you catch the back of the skis and fall onto the skis, whereas if they're drooping at the front, your toes are going in and you're going to go, whoa, smack. So it makes sense if you visualize it why you might have your skis drooping behind. So drifting or drooping kind of makes sense, but it's easier to rationalize drooping if you imagine what's going on. I think that one's really difficult, and I could easily understand if you chose drifting instead. Wow, that was quite tricky there. Right. Flying in really quickly. In a really sinister fashion, Bobo Nehi says, Robert, I am outside your house. I don't think you are, because you don't know where I live. And it's not the address that you think it is. And if you do know where I live, you're a very good spy indeed. And I'm a little bit intimidated by you. Anyway, let's push on to the... Fortunately, a really quick tip of the week this week, because this lesson has gone on far too long. I thought it was going to be a quick lesson because it's just going through some Cloze exercises, but I just explain far too much. I'm sorry. Anyway, as I said, you can always close my windows. Right, tip of the week this week is a really straightforward one. You may well be preparing for your exams by looking at lots of past papers from that style of exam. So you might be looking at, if you're preparing for independent schools, you might have pulled some past papers off their website or bought some similar papers from some company or other. Also, if you're paying for grammar schools, there are loads of books of CEM exams, GL exams, and so on and so forth. If you're paying for the CSSE, the Kent test, you'll have been on their respective websites and downloaded their samples, and you probably have a really clear idea of what this exam is going to involve. And then you turn up in the test and they've introduced a new question style or something's a bit different, and you go, I don't know what's going on, and you go into a panic. The best way to avoid that is not to get too fixated on what your exam board or school has set in previous years. It can change. These things often do change. And this is why you just need to keep preparing in a broad way, not just practice certain question styles, not just work on the past papers from your exam board. Keep it broad, focus on your skills and make sure that they are solid, and then you'll be able to deal with any kind of question. I said something similar before lots of times, but it's super important. Right, okay, I'm just very quickly going to take a few questions if you have any. Here we are. Mustn't forget the your questions jingle. Rita says, are you in America? No, I am not in America. Farhamed says, Bobo Nahi is a liar. Play nicely, people. Play nicely. Farhamed says, I've got a question, Robert, but then doesn't ask it. This is not going well. Right, if someone doesn't ask a question soon, I will... jump out of this and say goodbye to everybody. Amazing Grace says, I've done my exams. I'm free, Robert. Congratulations. Gemma says, thank you. Okay. Kumar says, when you have many gaps in the words and there is only one letter given, what would you do? I think I spoke about this earlier. I'm just going to say the same thing. So if you've got a long word with loads of gaps and just one or two letters in the middle, then that means that the examiner has thought there is enough of a clue in the rest of the sentence. And we just need to give a little hint so they know whether the word they've worked out is the right one. So that's an indication that you need to read the context, work out some words that are likely, and just check that they fit what's there. It's an example of a situation in which you don't want to start by just going in and trying out letter combinations in the word, because you probably never get there. Everyone's guessing where I live here. I'm not going to tell you where I live, but it's amusing to see the guesses. I think the chance of you guessing where I live is quite low. It isn't particularly obvious. Top says, what does RSL stand for? It's actually my initials. When I first put a book out there, I just did it as an experiment back in 2015. And I thought, what should I call this? What should I call this publishing business? And I just thought, RSL, that's my initials. RSL Educational sounds very smart and formal, so that's what I called it. I don't know. I don't think it's the best name, but it's the one I'm stuck with here. Someone says, how do you do long division quickly? It's a really good question, but it needs a lesson in its own right. What if we get nervous and make silly mistakes? Someone says, I don't know, don't. No, I'm joking. Everyone makes silly mistakes. It happens. I made an absolutely ridiculous maths mistake yesterday, which is horrendously embarrassing. I think it's about just practicing the things that you tend to make silly mistakes in. So as you do your practice tests and so on, you'll start to get a handle on what sorts of questions, what sort of situation leads to silly mistakes. You know they're the core skills you need to go into and practice more. You'll also spot the kind of mindset, the kind of mood that you're in when you make lots of silly mistakes, and you'll know to look out for it and be especially careful when that happens. Someone says, do you like VR? I think they're just asking because they know my opinions on reasoning tests and they want to see me rant again. I'm not going to do it. How do you do creative writing fast? You don't, it really is my answer to that. You have good systems and techniques, and you don't work fast. You just work steadily, giving yourself enough time to think if you spend too long on creative writing, if you don't have time to finish, it's normally because you've sat there for ages staring at the page and not sure what to do. If you've got good systems, you can work steadily. You don't need to be that fast. I'm just going to take a couple more. Can you give me tips for the KES exam? I guess that's the King Edward's School in Birmingham. It's quite similar to a lot of other independent school exams. So really, all my advice on that kind of exam format that I've given in loads of videos here on written comprehension, on creative writing, on standard format maths, it's all very relevant. I don't really have anything special to say about that exam. It isn't particularly weird. Okay, last question. What is this question going to be? People asking questions about specific schools and what their exams are like. Look on their websites. You'll find out the answer. How do you find out an answer when there is a synonym? I don't quite understand that. What was the embarrassing mistake? Someone said. Okay, I'll finish with that. It was to do with it's really boring, but it was just it's to do with how you multiply out a pair of brackets in maths. Something like really, really basic that even if you haven't covered it at 11 plus, you'll definitely cover in year 7. And I just did something really absurd that doesn't make any mathematical sense, and then couldn't understand why I'd come up with a weird. It's really boring. You don't want to know this. Can we do maths? Yes, you can. Right. Okay. That's good enough here. I've waffled on far too long. I need to leave you in peace. Even though I've waffled, please like this video and please subscribe to the channel. Get me past that 4,000 subscriber mark. Will make me very happy for at least a few minutes. And I hope to see you back next Tuesday evening at 6 o'clock for my next live lesson. And in the meantime, don't forget to explore the channel and to explore the links in the video description and see the link where it says free papers and resources. Click on that, stick your email address in, and free stuff will fly into your email account. That's it from me. Bye-bye.